They told her to tear it apart, said it was just an old machine with no future. She stood on the tarmac, hands, steady eyes fixed on the A-10 Thunderbolt parked behind a chain-link fence, its skin weathered, but not broken. Nobody looked at her twice. To them, she was just a mid-level logistics handler past her prime, assigned to oversee the final breaths of outdated warbirds. She didn't argue. She just watched and waited. 3 days later, a distress signal crackled through static. An elite unit had gone dark in the mountains. No air support available. Communications jammed. Radar down. The only jet left untouched was the one marked for scrap. They didn't ask her. No one even saw her leave. But as the base sirens howled and a guttural roar cut through the desert air, people looked up. The last jet was airborne, piloted by the woman they'd already written off. What happened next would silence a roomful of officers, shake the chain of command, and ignite a wave of respect they never thought they'd give. Not to her, not to that jet, not until both did something no one expected: come back. Part 1. Introducing Ava, the forgotten pilot. At 38, Ava Hunt moved through the airbase like a shadow with purpose. Her flight jacket was frayed at the cuffs, her boots scuffed from years of combat landings, but her posture stayed straight, her gaze unshaken. She didn't talk much, not because she had nothing to say, but because no one seemed to ask. Once she had been a name people knew. She flew missions over hostile skies, flanked convoys through storms of gunfire, and once landed an A-10 on a blown-out runway with half its instruments fried. Her fingers still remembered the vibrations of the stick, the subtle resistance in the rudder pedals, the way the cockpit smelled like metal sweat and grit. Now she signed off cargo manifests and coordinated spare parts. The young ones barely made eye contact. To them, she was someone past her prime, grounded, unnecessary. They didn't know the call signs she used to carry, or the soldiers who had whispered thank you, with blood on their uniforms, as she lifted them out of fire. Ava didn't argue. She wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. But every morning before the base woke, she walked the perimeter alone. Her boots tapped a rhythm only she heard, like an old song stuck in her bones. She always stopped by Hangar 6. That's where they kept her Warthog now. The same A-10 she flew in Kandahar, patched mid-mission, scarred but still breathing. They'd ordered it decommissioned. She called it resting. Sometimes when the sun hit just right, she would open the canopy, sit in the cockpit, and close her eyes. She didn't need to turn anything on. The hum was in her. The years hadn't taken that away. To those who looked, she was invisible. To the machine she once flew, she was still the pilot, and that was enough. For now. Part 2. The base where the past meets steel. The Nevada base stretched across the desert like a wound stitched with concrete and steel. From the air, it looked like a maze of hangars and runways, sharp-edged and sterile under a sun that never showed mercy. Temperatures climbed fast, baking the pavement by noon, and sandstorms rolled in without warning, chewing the paint off anything left exposed too long. The buildings were new. Angled glass walls, automated doors, drone bays with motion sensors and AI diagnostics. Inside, officers spoke in acronyms and algorithms. Nobody lingered in the hallways. Meetings ran like clockwork. Everything buzzed, updated, uploaded. Ava's office was tucked between two warehouses barely marked. Most people thought it was storage. Inside, she kept her desk clear, her boots by the door, and one photo on the wall. It was black and white, faded at the corners, showing her standing beside the A-10 with her helmet under one arm and the war still in her eyes. Beyond the flight line, behind 2 rows of security fencing, sat the aircraft they were phasing out. Drones that never flew. Transport carriers stripped of code. And one A-10 Thunderbolt, its paint dulled to a dusty gray, its shark-toothed nose art cracked but still grinning. That one was hers. The tech crew called it the dinosaur yard. The younger pilots joked that some of the jets were older than their parents. Ava never corrected them. She just walked the perimeter, her clipboard in hand, logging serial numbers and maintenance dates like she was checking on old friends. There was no reverence here. Not for the tools that once brought people home. Efficiency ruled. Speed mattered. The new birds ran on silicon, not steel. They didn't rattle when they fired. They didn't need pilots like her. She overheard a lieutenant once standing too close to the coffee station laughing about the relic with the broken wings and the woman who babysat it. Maybe she flew it back when radios still had knobs. His buddy nearly choked on a protein bar, snorting hard through his nose. Ava passed behind them, quiet as ever. She didn't take offense. There was nothing to defend. But every time she saw the A-10, its frame weathered but intact, she felt the past tug at her like a hand on her sleeve. It wasn't pride. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something harder to name. That plane had outlived its time just like her. And maybe in a place where data ruled and instincts were suspect, that made both of them dangerous in the wrong hands. Or maybe in the right moment, the only ones who could still do what needed to be done. Part 3. Dismissed in silence. The quiet rejection. 3.1. Ignored and belittled. They rarely said her name. If they spoke to her at all, it was clipped and functional, like ticking off a task. Sergeant Hunt. We need a count on the ground units. Sergeant, those clearance codes. No thank you. No eye contact. The younger officers walked past her without pause. Their boots cleaned, their uniforms sharp, their eyes fixed ahead like they didn't see her. When they did speak, it was often with a smirk. One morning in the mess hall, a group joked about how the A-10 could probably still fly if someone found a cassette player to hook up. One laughed too loud, then lowered his voice when he noticed her sitting nearby alone, stirring instant coffee with the handle of her fork. She didn't respond. She never did. Not because it didn't sting, but because she refused to give them a reaction. They weren't the ones who carried the dead out of smoldering wreckage. They hadn't felt the G-force in their ribs or the thud of a cannon shake the sky. They didn't know. Her commanding officer had once flown 2 back when flight logs were scribbled in pen. But now he wore a desk like a second skin and rarely looked up from reports. He told her the A-10 was a memory, not a mission, and she needed to move on like everyone else. Every evening after the hangars emptied out, Ava stayed behind. She checked the hydraulics on the Thunderbolt, recalibrated the controls, ran diagnostics even though no one asked. The plane didn't speak, but it didn't have to. It was alive in the way veterans sometimes are. Quiet, worn, but not done. Her fingers moved over the cockpit like tracing the lines of an old face. She knew every sound, every panel, every stubborn bolt. She didn't wear gloves. The oil stayed in her skin, and the dust settled in her collar, and she liked it that way. No one joined her. No one noticed when she wiped the canopy clean with her sleeve or when she checked the fuel lines out of habit. The plane wasn't going anywhere. Neither was she. And still, night after night, she showed up. She told herself she wasn't waiting, that there was nothing coming. But deep down in the still part of her chest where instinct lived, she knew. There would come a moment when the past would matter again, when experience would be the only thing left to lean on. Until then, she let them laugh, let them dismiss her, let them call it scrap. The Warthog knew better. So did she. 3.2. Denied from the briefing. The room was too bright, too cold, and too full of people who spoke in confident tones without saying much at all. Maps covered the central screen. Coordinates blinked red. A squad had gone dark in a narrow canyon region where radio signals struggled and terrain twisted like a trap. Ava stood at the back, her clipboard in hand boots silent against the floor. She listened as they discussed satellite delays and drone coverage, none of which would reach the target zone fast enough. She cleared her throat once, then spoke, her voice steady. She knew that region, had flown it years ago. She could guide them in. The colonel didn't turn. He waved a hand like brushing away static. Logistics take the 4th seat in recon. You're observing. You're not flying. Ava nodded. Said yes, sir. That was all they wanted to hear. She stepped out into the sun, the door clicking behind her like a lock. Her jaw tightened. The tension didn't show in her shoulders or her walk, but it burned behind her eyes. She had expected the dismissal. What she didn't expect was how calm she felt afterward. That squad was still out there. She had seen the terrain up close. She could picture the ambush points, the dead zones, the elevation shifts no camera could catch, and she knew in her gut the mission wouldn't hold. Back in her quarters, she packed light, not out of hope, out of certainty. She folded her helmet into a duffel she wasn't supposed to carry, along with gloves, maps, and a single flight manual dog-eared at the margins. They gave her a seat to observe. That was fine. Let them call it what they wanted. When the time came, and it would, she wouldn't be observing anything. She'd be flying. Part 4. Her decision. The unshaken pilot. The mountains rose like teeth around them, jagged and unforgiving. Fog clung low over the ridgelines and the radio crackled with broken fragments of panic. Ava sat behind the pilot, eyes locked on the terrain headset. Tight breath steady. She didn't blink when the first call came in from the ground team. Voices were cut with static words jumbled, but she heard enough. Fire. Hostiles. Pinned. She leaned forward, slightly absorbing every detail. The smoke trails on the horizon. The sudden silence after a scream. The stutter in the helicopter's pitch when the pilot flinched at the flash of a nearby explosion. 2 clicks to the east, there was a choke point she remembered. A natural funnel. Perfect for an ambush. The chopper dipped low, hugging the side of the valley, but they were too slow, too far, and too unarmed to do more than watch. Ava's fingers curled around the strap on her vest. Her voice didn't waver when she asked the pilot to turn around. He gave her a sideways glance, like she was joking, then looked forward again without responding. She asked once more, this time flat and final. Take us back. He shook his head, said it wasn't the order. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just nodded once and sat back. Her mind wasn't in the air anymore. It was already on the ground, already in the cockpit, already calculating fuel loads, wind drag, ordnance readiness entry paths. The A-10 was stripped and tagged, but it still had its guns, still had its teeth. She thought about the map in her head, the muscle memory in her hands, the way that bird had once moved like it understood her. There wasn't fear. Not really. Just this crystal clarity that felt like stepping into a current she already knew how to swim. Her heart beat steady. Her voice was calm when she keyed her mic and passed a burst of coordinates to command. They snapped back fast, sharp, questioning her presence on that channel. She cut the feed and leaned toward the pilot again. If you don't fly us back, I'll walk from the next drop zone. He didn't respond at first, but something in her tone made him glance over. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't asking. He pulled the bird into a turn low and sharp. Ava stared out the window. The canyon slipped behind them, still on fire. And she knew this was it. Not a choice, not really. Just the thing she was built to do, waiting for her to finally come back to it. Part 5. The Mission. 5.1. Ignition. The jet wakes up. The night was thick and silent, broken only by the faint hum of distant generators. Ava's boots struck the cracked tarmac with deliberate steps, each one echoing like a heartbeat. She moved past the rows of silent jets and dimly lit hangars, a shadow slipping through a world that had already turned off its lights. Maintenance crews near the A-10 caught sight of her too late. Their chatter died mid-sentence, eyes widening as she approached the aging Warthog. It sat still, wings folded and tagged for decommission parts missing here and there, but untouched by the final blow. It was waiting. Without hesitation, Ava climbed the ladder and slid into the cockpit. The seat felt familiar, like an old friend welcoming her back. She ran her hands across the controls, dust-covered but intact. She ignored the flashing warning lights and malfunction beeps, trusting what her hands knew better than any screen. Her fingers moved methodically over switches, bypassing safety locks, priming fuel lines, coaxing life back into cold engines. The hum grew into a roar. The plane shuddered, coughed, then howled with raw power. Sirens blared across the base. Red lights spun in warning, and voices cracked over the radio, demanding her to abort. She blocked it out. The noise was static. Her mind was focused, steady, certain. The Warthog wasn't dead yet. It was waking up. The growl in the engines was a promise, a call to arms. She released the brakes, feeling the machine surge beneath her like a beast unchained. The ground shook as the wheels rolled forward, picking up speed, breaking free from the earth that held it back. The base scrambled in confusion and alarm, but she was already climbing, cutting through the night sky, turning a forgotten relic into a soaring legend. 5.2. The Impossible Run. Fire in the Canyon. The canyon walls closed in like a vice as Ava maneuvered the battered A-10 through the narrow passes. Her hands gripped the controls with practiced ease, feeling every vibration, every shift in wind, every pulse of the engine beneath her. The old Warthog shuddered, its systems glitching, but she coaxed it forward, knowing this flight was more than just a mission. Below, the radio crackled with frantic voices, soldiers pinned down and desperate, calling for help that seemed impossibly far away. Ava's eyes scanned the heat signatures flickering on the HUD. Enemy vehicles were closing fast, their weapons locked and ready. Time was razor thin, and mistakes were fatal. She let loose a burst from the 30mm cannon. the thunder tearing through the stillness, ripping the lead vehicle to shreds. Flames bloomed across the hillside as she rolled the jet into a steep climb, evading missiles that screamed past. Her breaths stayed even her mind sharp. The Warthog was a weapon, a shield, and a lifeline all at once. Missiles pounded the air around her, some too close for comfort. The left engine coughed and sputtered, warning lights flashing across the cockpit like fireflies in the dark. She didn't flinch. Every move was instinct, every turn precise. The jet bucked and roared beneath her, battered but not broken. One by one, enemy vehicles fell to her fire. The trapped squad's cries softened hope, blooming in their voices as Ava cleared a path through the chaos. She covered their retreat with suppressive bursts, flying low enough to scrape rock walls but fast enough to avoid ground fire. The Warthog's frame groaned with every maneuver. Smoke trailed from damaged panels and the landing gear refused to lock. Ava's heart pounded with the jet's rhythm. This wasn't just a flight. It was a fight for survival, a desperate ballet with death. When the last soldier finally cleared the kill zone, she banked hard, pushing the plane's limits one final time. The battered jet limped home, carrying the weight of scars both visible and unseen. Ava didn't look back. The rescue was done. Lives were saved. And the legend of the Warthog lived on, breathing through her hands. The airbase was quiet as Ava's plane touched down. No cheers, no applause. Just a stunned silence that stretched long enough to feel like a question hanging in the hot desert air. Her landing was rough, the damaged A-10 scraping the runway with a grating scrape that echoed like a cry. Mechanics rushed forward, eyes wide with disbelief. The commanding officer appeared face-tight with fury and disbelief. He barked orders, demanding explanations, accusing her of breaking protocol and risking lives. Ava met his gaze without flinching, calm and unshaken. She handed over her helmet and said simply that she brought the squad home. Within hours, footage of the mission had leaked. Not by her, but by one of the rescued soldiers who streamed the radio chatter and gunfire on encrypted channels. The video went viral, replayed across military bases and news stations. Viewers watched the impossible flight through the canyon, the precision fire, the near misses. Awe spread quickly, turning skepticism into admiration. Investigations followed. Questions about command decisions, about the dismissal of a skilled pilot, about protocol and courage. The commanding officer found himself under scrutiny, his orders questioned. Ava's file was reopened. Her reinstatement was swift, a quiet reversal that carried weight beyond words. But she didn't return to the cockpit. Not yet. She chose to stay grounded, becoming an instructor. In classrooms filled with young pilots, she recreated that impossible mission again and again. Her voice steady, her lessons clear. Listen to the aircraft, trust your instincts, fight when it matters. The respect she earned was not just for the flight or the heroics. It was for the strength she had carried all along. The quiet resilience, the years of waiting, the unyielding belief that sometimes the old ways still had power. Students looked to her not just as a teacher, but as a legend. In the years that followed, Ava's story was told again and again, not for glory, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes when all seems lost, the one who has been forgotten is the one who can bring you home. The hangar was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of overhead lights that barely warmed the cool night air. Ava stood beside the A-10, its surface marked now with a bold inscription that honored its resurrection through courage. She reached out, fingers tracing the chipped paint and scars left from battle memories folding around her like a familiar song. A fellow officer approached his step, cautious but respectful. He spoke without ceremony, telling her how the story had changed everything here, how the old pilot's quiet strength had rewritten what they thought was possible. Ava listened, nodding slowly, the weight of unspoken understanding passing between them. Outside, the desert stretched vast and silent under a sky scattered with stars. The base settled into a calm that felt earned, the kind that comes after storms have passed. Ava turned away from the plane, her steps steady and sure on the concrete. She didn't need applause or medals tonight. Her pride was quieter than that. It was in the knowing that when everything was stripped away, when all orders failed, she had been the echo, the final voice of a warthog that refused to be silenced. And as she disappeared into the night, the distant roar of a jet echoed softly behind her, a reminder that some stories never truly end. If this story moved you, take a moment to share it. Let others hear what it means to rise when the world says no.